Evan Maddox always believed that silence had a shape. In his home, it drifted like thin mist, never loud enough to frighten him, never soft enough to ignore. It settled between him and Caleb Archer more often now, wrapping itself around their evenings like an invisible curtain neither dared pull aside. Most nights, Evan cooked dinner while Caleb arrived late, offering tired smiles and half-hearted explanations about work running long again. Nothing dramatic, nothing that could be pointed to as guilt, just a growing distance disguised as exhaustion. Evan told himself it was normal. Every long-term relationship had its seasons. Still, something in Caleb's quietness felt weighted, as if he were carrying a thought he didn't want to name. Evan tried to ease it with small gestures, Caleb's favorite tea, a hand lingering on his shoulder, a question phrased gently enough to invite honesty without pressure. Caleb appreciated all of it, but in that polite, grateful way that made Evan feel like a guest offering help, not a partner sharing life. The warmth between them was still there, but muted, as if someone had placed a thin screen over a once vivid light. They hadn't argued. They hadn't grown cold. They had simply begun drifting, slowly, steadily, like two boats anchored side by side yet turning with separate tides. One evening, Evan found Caleb standing alone in the hallway, holding his phone with an expression that flickered between tenderness and guilt. Caleb locked the screen the moment he heard footsteps, smiling too quickly as if to cover something delicate. Long day? Evan asked. Yeah. Just, a lot on my mind. Caleb kissed him on the cheek, gentle, affectionate, but distant in its own way. I'll explain when I can. Evan nodded, pretending that explanation wasn't overdue. Over the next week, the shift deepened. Caleb's laughter came less easily. His attention wandered during conversations. He disappeared into the balcony at night, staring at the city as though searching its skyline for answers Evan couldn't give him. Evan watched him from the doorway, unsure whether to interrupt the solitude or respect it. He chose silence, believing that space was an act of love, but space became a pattern. And patterns always reveal something. Caleb began mentioning a new colleague he was helping with a project, though he never offered a name. The omission struck Evan as strange, not suspicious, just oddly careful. Caleb described the work in vague strokes, enough to justify his late hours but not enough to draw a picture of the person involved. Evan didn't press. He understood privacy. He just didn't understand why that privacy suddenly felt like distance rather than boundary. One night, when Caleb returned later than usual, Evan sat on the couch with a book he wasn't really reading. Caleb stepped inside quietly, as if afraid to wake something fragile. You're up, Caleb said softly. I wanted to see you. Caleb smiled, genuine but tired. I know. I'm sorry. Things are complicated. Work complicated? Evan asked. Caleb hesitated, only for a second, but long enough for the silence around them to thicken. Sort of. It wasn't an answer, and they both knew it. But Evan didn't push. He simply nodded, letting Caleb's sigh linger between them like a confession he still wasn't ready to voice. Days passed. The emotional thread between them frayed, not in dramatic snaps but in subtle, persistent wear. Evan noticed Caleb becoming more protective of his phone, turning it face down at dinner, slipping it into his pocket when a message arrived. Nothing overtly suspicious, just careful. Too careful. Evan convinced himself it meant nothing. People changed their habits. People grew tired. People struggled privately. Yet beneath every rational explanation, a quieter intuition stirred, soft but persistent, like a pulse he couldn't ignore. Still, he loved Caleb enough to wait for honesty. He had built a life on patience, trust, and the belief that truth eventually rose to the surface. The turning point came at a weekend gathering hosted by mutual friends, something Evan almost skipped due to the tension at home, but Caleb insisted they attend. He spoke with an eagerness Evan hadn't seen in weeks, as though the idea of normalcy offered temporary relief. The evening unfolded smoothly, laughs, mild conversations, the usual warmth of familiar faces. But Evan felt Caleb scanning the room more than participating in it, searching for someone who hadn't arrived yet. That someone walked in 20 minutes late. That he was tall, with a soft jawline and an easy confidence that made him instantly noticeable. His presence wasn't loud, but it was magnetic, enough that the air in the room shifted subtly when he entered. He greeted the hosts, then moved toward Caleb with a familiarity that struck Evan immediately. "Caleb," the stranger said warmly. Caleb's expression changed, brightened, softened, opened. "Liam. You made it." Liam Rourke. The name introduced casually, yet Evan recognized it instantly as the one Caleb had avoided saying. Caleb introduced them. "Evan, this is Liam, my co-worker." Co-worker. The word felt thin, insufficient to explain the connection sparking between them with every glance. Liam extended a hand, and Evan shook it, noting the friendly sincerity in Liam's eyes. Nothing threatening. Nothing overt. Just warmth, a warmth that Caleb seemed to respond to instinctively. They talked briefly, exchanging polite words. Evan listened more than he spoke, watching the subtle energy between Caleb and Liam. Their comfort with each other felt established. Familiar. Too natural to be new, too effortless to be casual. Evan didn't feel jealousy, at least not yet. What he felt was recognition. A quiet realization that Liam wasn't simply a colleague or a friend. He was the shape inside Caleb's silence, the thought Caleb couldn't articulate, the wish he carried like a secret weight. Later, as the night settled and conversations thinned, Evan stood near the balcony doors, watching Caleb and Liam laugh softly across the room. The moment wasn't inappropriate. It wasn't intimate. It wasn't anything Evan could confront, but it was everything he needed to understand that something was shifting, something deep, something quiet, something Caleb had not yet said. And though the evening ended with the same polite goodbyes and familiar routines, Evan felt it in his chest, the beginning of a truth approaching, slow but inevitable, like a tide that always reaches the shore. It was the first time he realized their story was changing, and the last time he believed silence was harmless. Evan woke the next morning with a sense of quiet unease. The previous night's encounter lingered in his thoughts, not the laughter or the polite introductions, but the way Caleb's attention had softened when Liam entered the room. It was subtle, nearly imperceptible to anyone else, yet it struck Evan with the force of recognition. Something had shifted, and it was no longer confined to hushed glances or missed conversations. At breakfast, Caleb seemed distracted, stirring his coffee absent-mindedly as though he were mentally elsewhere. He smiled at Evan when spoken to, but the warmth felt delayed, filtered through an invisible veil. Evan chose not to comment immediately, instead watching the familiar movements, the way Caleb's hand lingered near his mug a moment longer than necessary, and the faint crease between his brows that hadn't been there before. "You're quiet today," Caleb remarked, finally breaking the tension with a casual tone. "Just thinking," Evan said, letting his words hang. "About work, life, whatever." Caleb nodded, but his eyes flicked toward the phone charging on the counter. Evan noticed how quickly Caleb's gaze returned to his plate, almost as if he were guarding his own attention. Something about the timing felt deliberate. Not malicious, not deceitful, but careful. Careful enough that Evan sensed a deeper story simmering beneath the surface. The day unfolded with its usual rhythm, Evan working from home, Caleb disappearing for meetings and phone calls, the silence between them stretching thin. Yet even in the routine, Evan detected subtle changes. Caleb's messages were shorter, his laughter lighter, almost rehearsed. Evan wondered whether he imagined it, or whether Caleb was consciously building a wall he hadn't yet acknowledged. By evening, Evan decided he could no longer ignore the feeling. He suggested a walk through the neighborhood, hoping that movement and fresh air would loosen the invisible tension. Caleb agreed, seemingly without hesitation, but Evan noted the brief hesitation in his posture, the way his shoulders tensed as they stepped out into the cool twilight. They walked side by side, passing familiar streets and streetlights casting long shadows. Evan chose his words carefully, cautious not to confront, only to invite. "Are you happy?" he asked. Caleb's stride faltered, and he glanced at Evan briefly before looking ahead. "I think so. Some days are better than others." Evan didn't press, though he sensed the avoidance. He had learned over the years that pressing too hard often led to walls, not answers. Still, he couldn't shake the sense that Caleb's quiet wish, the one he carried like a secret weight, was becoming more tangible, more insistent. A few days later, Evan noticed a new pattern. Caleb leaving the house with his laptop bag in the morning, returning later than he claimed, his energy slightly elevated after long phone calls. Evan observed the changes in small increments, cataloging each as if they were puzzle pieces, hoping they would form a coherent picture. But they did not. Instead, they created tension, unease, and the persistent hum of suspicion. Then, one afternoon, Evan discovered a small, folded note tucked under a stack of mail. The handwriting was unmistakable, Caleb's. He hesitated before unfolding it, unsure whether he wanted to read it or leave it for another day. But curiosity, mingled with fear, won. The note was brief, almost fragile. I wish I could tell you everything. But I don't know if I can. I hope you'll understand someday. Evan's hands trembled slightly as he refolded the paper. Nothing explicit, nothing detailed, just a quiet admission of longing, a confession that something unspoken existed between them. The words confirmed what Evan had suspected all along. Caleb carried a wish, a desire, a thought he hadn't yet shared. But the note offered no clarity on whether that wish included Evan or someone else entirely. The tension in the house grew heavier after that. Evan began noticing Caleb's subtle gestures toward Liam, the way Caleb's voice brightened when he spoke of project deadlines that coincided with Liam's visits, or the way he lingered on Liam's messages, smiling softly when reading them alone in another room. Evan didn't want to confront, didn't want to accuse. But he couldn't ignore the evidence his own heart and mind were piecing together. One evening, Evan found himself alone in the living room, scrolling through his own thoughts more than any actual messages. He realized that Caleb's affection for him was still there. It hadn't disappeared, but it was shaded now, filtered through unspoken emotions. The man he loved was struggling between the life they had built and a desire he hadn't shared. And the longer it remained unsaid, the further Evan felt himself from the person he thought he knew. When Caleb returned home that night, he seemed restless. The usual calmness was replaced by a subtle energy, a vibration Evan could feel when he stepped into the room. Caleb spoke softly, almost cautiously. Evan. I need to tell you something. Evan's stomach tightened. He had waited for this moment, dreaded it, and hoped for it all at once. Okay, he said. His voice was steady, but his pulse raced. Caleb hesitated, his eyes searching Evan's face as if measuring how much of the truth could be revealed without shattering them both. Then, just as he began to speak, a notification chimed on his phone. Caleb's expression shifted, and he turned away, swiping the screen with practiced ease. I'll tell you later, Caleb murmured. Evan swallowed the disappointment, sensing that the conversation he needed most would be delayed again. The night continued with polite routine, dinner, laughter faintly forced, an early retreat to separate rooms. But the weight of Caleb's unspoken words pressed down on Evan, heavier than anything he could have imagined. As Evan lay awake, he replayed every interaction, every glance, every smile Caleb had given Liam in recent days. The images weren't dramatic, not threatening, but they were intimate in a way only emotional connection can be. Evan understood, with a painful clarity, that Caleb's quiet wish was no longer a vague thought. It had taken form, and its gravity reached far beyond the walls of their apartment. By the time dawn broke, Evan made a silent promise to himself: he would confront the truth, whatever it was. He didn't yet know how, or when, or what he would find. But he knew that the quiet wish Caleb carried would not remain hidden much longer, and that when it surfaced, nothing would ever be the same. It was no longer just tension or distance. It was a turning point, and Evan felt it in the hollow ache of anticipation, the awareness that love and longing can coexist, even when their paths diverged. He closed his eyes, waiting for the inevitable, knowing that the coming days would force choices, revelations, and consequences he could no longer avoid. And with that understanding came the first real stirrings of fear, hope, and a fragile courage he didn't yet fully recognize. Evan sat at the kitchen table, the morning light filtering through blinds and casting thin stripes across the counter. His hands were wrapped around a mug of untouched coffee, his thoughts circling one point with relentless persistence: Caleb. For days, he had sensed the widening space between them, the tension thickening like fog in an unventilated room. And now, he knew he could no longer wait. When Caleb finally emerged from the bedroom, brushing back disheveled hair, Evan's chest tightened. He wanted answers, wanted honesty, wanted the weight between them lifted. Yet he also feared what he might hear. Caleb carried something heavy, something Evan had seen in glimpses, shadows, and brief smiles, but he did not yet know its full shape. "Evan," Caleb began, his voice tentative, almost brittle. "We need to talk." Evan nodded, rising slowly, bracing himself for the inevitable. "I've been waiting," he said. I need to know." Caleb sighed and ran a hand over his face, exhaling a sound that seemed to carry years of restraint. "I've been confused," he admitted. "About us. About me. About what I want and who I am." Evan's pulse quickened, though he remained silent, allowing Caleb to continue. "There's something I've been hiding," Caleb said, looking at his hands. "A part of me I've struggled to acknowledge. And it's not fair to you that I've kept it quiet for so long." Evan swallowed the lump in his throat. "Go on," he urged, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside. Caleb's eyes met his for the first time in days, clear and vulnerable. I have feelings for someone else," he admitted, each word deliberate, as if weighing the impact before letting it loose. "It's not that I love you any less, but my heart, it's been drawn somewhere I didn't expect." The words landed with quiet precision, the room suddenly smaller, the air thicker. Evan felt a sharp ache, but it wasn't entirely surprise. He had sensed this shift, observed the warmth between Caleb and Liam, felt the subtle energy Evan could not deny. Yet hearing it, spoken plainly, was a different gravity altogether. "Liam," Evan said softly, almost as a question, though he already knew. Caleb nodded, a flicker of guilt shadowing his expression. "Yes. I never meant to hurt you. I thought I could. I don't know, compartmentalize. But it's impossible. He makes me feel seen in ways I've forgotten existed. And I tried to ignore it, to stay with you fully. But pretending hasn't worked. I can't pretend anymore." Evan felt the sting of betrayal, but beneath it, a thread of clarity began to weave through the pain. The silence that had hung between them for weeks now made sense, the vague gestures, the hidden phone, the quiet wish Caleb had carried, it all led here. "I see," Evan said, his voice steady, though his hands trembled slightly as they rested on the table. I don't hate you. I don't even blame you entirely. But I need to understand, why now?" Caleb's gaze softened. "Because I realized keeping it inside was breaking me. I wanted honesty, for both of us. I was scared. Scared of losing you. Scared of losing myself." Evan let the words settle, the weight of years and emotions pressing against him. He had loved Caleb fiercely, devotedly, but love did not erase the truth. It did not make longing for someone else vanish. And though he grieved the betrayal, he also recognized the courage it had taken for Caleb to speak. They sat in silence for a long moment, the quiet heavy but not entirely hostile. Evan's mind raced, cataloging memories, laughter, conversations, the life they had shared. And he realized that despite the heartbreak, he still cared. Not enough to ignore the truth, but enough to honor it with clarity. "So, what happens now?" Evan asked finally. Caleb looked at him, vulnerability raw. "I don't know. I need to figure out what this means, what I want. I don't want to hurt you further. I can't continue pretending that nothing has changed." Evan nodded slowly, feeling both the ache of loss and the first sparks of self-preservation. "I think, we need space. To understand ourselves. To be honest about what we need. If you stay, I want it to be because you choose me fully. If not, I need to let you go." Caleb's lips quivered slightly, but he nodded. "I understand. And I'm sorry, Evan. For the lies, the distance, everything. I never wanted to hurt you." Evan felt a wave of conflicting emotions, grief, love, disappointment, and relief. Grief for the trust fractured, love for the years they had shared, disappointment for what could not be salvaged, and relief that the unspoken truth was finally revealed. Over the next few days, Evan and Caleb navigated this fragile limbo. They spoke with care, delineating boundaries, acknowledging emotions without blame. Caleb spent more time with Liam, gradually clarifying his feelings, while Evan withdrew to examine his own heart. He realized that love, though painful, also offered clarity. The man he had loved was no longer the same partner he had known, but that didn't diminish the life they had shared, the lessons learned, or the resilience Evan now discovered within himself. One evening, Evan walked through the park alone, the crisp air brushing against his face, and he reflected on the journey. Caleb's quiet wish had broken them, not violently, not dramatically, but in a way that revealed the depth of hidden desires, unspoken truths, and emotional complexity. And though it left a hollow ache, it also offered a kind of liberation, the chance to rediscover himself, to embrace honesty, and to recognize that love, even when fractured, could teach growth. Evan returned home to an empty apartment, the walls still echoing with shared memories, and he felt a quiet strength settle over him. Caleb's choice had shifted their world, but it had also illuminated the path Evan would now take. Not out of vengeance, not out of bitterness, but out of clarity, self-respect, and an understanding that sometimes, love's true lesson lies in letting go. As night fell, Evan sat by the window, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. His heart ached, yes, but within that ache, he found resolve. The quiet wish Caleb had hidden from him had changed everything. And yet, in its wake, it had granted Evan something far more profound, the knowledge that he could endure, that he could heal, and that he could continue to love, not blindly, not unconditionally, but wisely, and fully aware of what his heart truly deserved. And in that understanding, he realized that endings could carry beginnings too. That sometimes, the most painful revelations also contain the seeds of self-discovery. And with that thought, Evan closed his eyes, letting the night enfold him, ready to face the days ahead with courage, honesty, and an unwavering sense of who he was becoming.